There are moments in life that arrive quietly, almost shy, as if afraid to disturb the flow of ordinary days, and yet those moments end up changing the course of everything that comes after. This story begins with one of those moments. It begins on a cold evening in the mid-90s, when a young Sandra Bullock sat in the corner of a dimly lit studio hallway, trying to steady her breathing and silence the shaking in her hands. People often imagine actors as confident, polished, and unbreakable, but that night Sandra felt like a stranger inside her own body. Her career was still young, her future uncertain, and she kept fearing that one wrong move would make everything fall apart. She didn't expect that the person walking down the hallway toward her would be someone who would rewrite the quiet, hidden chapters of her life. She didn't expect that Keanu Reeves would stop, sit beside her, and start a chain of events that neither of them fully understood at the time. The hallway was empty except for the echo of distant footsteps, and Sandra felt trapped in her thoughts. She kept going over her lines, repeating them in her head, searching for a calm she couldn't find. She didn't know how visible her panic was, but apparently it was visible enough for Keanu to notice from several steps away. He had this stillness about him, a gentle kind of presence that made people feel safe without him even trying. He walked slowly, not wanting to startle her, and when he reached her, he crouched down so he wasn't towering over her. He asked if she was all right, but his tone wasn't one of pity or impatience. It was soft, respectful, as if he genuinely wanted to know, not because he had to, but because he cared. And that simple act, that small gesture of kindness, struck something deep inside her. She felt her chest loosen just a little, enough to take a real breath. She admitted in a voice barely above a whisper that she felt overwhelmed. She expected him to laugh or brush it off, but he didn't. Instead, he sat on the floor beside her, ignoring the fact that he still had rehearsals of his own. He told her that fear wasn't a sign of weakness, but a sign of how much she cared. He said he got nervous too, more often than people would believe. Sandra looked at him, searching for any hint of exaggeration, but there was none. Keanu didn't know how to lie to make himself look better. He spoke with a simplicity that made everything feel possible. She realized then that kindness didn't need to be loud to be powerful. As the minutes passed, their conversation grew deeper without either of them meaning for it to happen. She told him about her doubts, her fear of not being good enough, her fear of disappointing everyone. He listened with a patience that made her feel like her words mattered. He shared stories too, moments of his own insecurities, things he had never said out loud to many people. There was something calming about knowing that someone so admired could also feel fragile. It made Sandra feel less alone, less strange for being afraid. She found herself laughing softly at one of his stories, and he smiled, relieved to see the tension leave her shoulders. It was a simple laugh, quiet and unpolished, but for some reason it echoed in his mind long after the moment passed. They went into rehearsal after that, and something had changed. Sandra felt more grounded, more present. Keanu didn't hover or try to guide her, but she could feel his support from across the room, as if his belief in her had created a space where she could breathe. Every time she looked toward him, he gave her a small, reassuring nod, the kind that said, "You're okay, you're doing fine, keep going." And she did. She didn't forget her lines, her voice didn't shake. For the first time in days, she felt like herself again. And though neither of them knew it, that night planted the first seed of a bond that would keep surprising them for years. But their story wasn't smooth or easy. Friendships in the film world were complicated, full of schedules, distance, and unspoken emotions. Sandra felt something growing inside her that she didn't want to name. It wasn't the typical kind of attraction people talked about. It was something quieter, something built on trust and warmth. She tried to push it away, afraid it would ruin the easy comfort they shared, but the more she tried, the stronger it became. And Keanu, with his careful eyes and gentle patience, seemed to sense everything without needing words. He treated her with the same respect every day, never crossing boundaries, never assuming anything. But there were moments, brief flashes, when Sandra caught a softness in his gaze, a question he never asked. She didn't know how to answer a question that hadn't been spoken. As weeks turned to months, they drifted through the strange rhythm of filming, always close but never quite meeting in the middle. Sometimes Sandra wondered if he felt the same pull she did, or if she was imagining it because she wanted it so badly. Sometimes she thought he would tell her, and other times she feared he wouldn't, that he would keep his feelings hidden behind the same humble smile he showed everyone. There were days when they joked like old friends, and days when they barely spoke, not out of anger, but out of a careful distance they both maintained. It was a delicate dance, filled with feelings too strong to ignore and too fragile to touch. Then came the night everything shifted again. They had finished a long day of filming, and most people had already left. Sandra stayed behind to run through her lines, determined to get a scene right. She didn't notice that the lights in the hallway flickered or that the building felt emptier than usual. When she finally stepped outside, she realized the parking lot was almost dark, lit only by a few struggling lamps. She wrapped her arms around herself, wishing she had left earlier. She took a few steps toward her car, but a shadow moved near the far wall, and her heart jumped. She wasn't sure if it was a person or just her imagination, but fear rushed through her anyway. Before she could decide what to do, a calm voice called her name. She turned and saw Keanu walking toward her, holding a jacket in his hand. He told her he noticed her car was still in the lot and came back to check on her before heading home. Sandra felt a wave of relief so strong it made her knees weak. She didn't want him to see her shaken, but of course he saw anyway. He didn't ask questions, didn't make a big deal of it. He simply walked beside her, keeping a respectful distance, but close enough for her to feel safe. When they reached her car, he handed her the jacket because he said she looked cold, and she realized her hands were trembling again. He placed the jacket gently over her shoulders, not touching her, but somehow the warmth of the gesture went deeper than the fabric ever could. For a moment they just stood there, the night quiet around them, the air heavy with all the things neither of them said. Sandra wanted to speak, to thank him, to admit something she didn't fully understand yet, but the words tangled inside her throat. Keanu looked at her, searching her expression, as if he sensed the shift too. His eyes held a softness she had only seen in rare moments, something honest and unguarded. She felt a pull, strong and undeniable. But before she could move, before she could breathe the truth rising inside her, the sound of a door slamming broke the moment apart. They both turned, startled, but the parking lot was empty again. The sudden noise left their hearts racing. Sandra looked back at Keanu, hoping the moment wasn't lost, hoping the connection was still there, but something had changed. The spell had broken. He took a small step back, not because he wanted to, but because he was afraid of crossing a line neither of them talked about. Sandra felt the distance grow between them, even though only a few feet separated their bodies. She tried to hold onto the warmth of his gesture, but doubt crept in again. Maybe she had imagined the unspoken question in his eyes. Maybe he didn't feel anything beyond friendship. Maybe she was reading too much into kindness that wasn't meant to carry deeper meaning. She opened her mouth to speak, but he gently cut her off, saying he should let her get home safely. His voice was softer than before, almost strained, as if he was holding something back. She nodded, unable to find the right words, and watched him walk toward his own car. But even as he walked away, she felt something rising inside her chest, something she could no longer ignore. She realized this wasn't simple. This wasn't a brief connection or a passing feeling. Something real was beginning to grow, and it scared her more than anything else. As she got into her car, her hands still trembling, she wondered what he wasn't telling her. What emotion he kept hidden behind his gentle smile. What truth he hadn't found the courage to share. And as she started the engine, she didn't realize that Keanu, sitting in his own car across the lot, was thinking the exact same thing. But neither of them knew that the next day would bring something unexpected, something that would break the fragile balance they had been trying so hard to protect. Something that neither of them was ready for. And it would change everything. The next morning began with a kind of tension that Sandra couldn't name. She woke earlier than usual, long before the sun had fully risen, and lay still in her bed while her thoughts chased each other in circles. She kept seeing Keanu's face in the dim parking lot light, the quiet worry in his eyes, the way he stepped back even though she could feel he wanted to stay. Something about that moment had settled deep inside her, refusing to loosen its grip. She tried to shake it off, telling herself she was reading too much into it, but there was a heaviness in her chest that reminded her that last night had not been ordinary. Something had shifted, and she didn't know how to pretend it hadn't. When she arrived on set, the air felt charged in a strange way, like everyone sensed something brewing beneath the surface. The crew moved around with hurried energy, the kind that came before long, exhausting hours. Sandra walked through the hallway where she and Keanu had talked the night before, and for a second she paused, remembering how vulnerable she had felt and how steady his presence had been. She wondered if he was already here, if he was thinking about the same moment, or if he had already pushed it out of his mind. She didn't know which thought frightened her more. She found him in the break room, standing near the counter with a cup of tea in his hands. He wasn't alone. 2 crew members were chatting beside him, but the moment he noticed her, his attention shifted. There was a small, almost invisible softening in his expression, the kind that only someone who had looked at him too many times would notice. Sandra felt a flutter of relief, but also a nervous trembling she couldn't control. She wondered what he would say, if he would mention last night. If he would avoid it, if he would act like nothing had happened at all. He didn't do any of those things right away. Instead, he gave her a gentle good morning, the kind that carried more emotion than the words themselves. She returned the greeting, trying to keep her voice steady, but she felt like both of them were walking on thin ice, afraid that one wrong step would crack something neither of them knew how to fix. When the crew members left the room, the silence between them grew heavier. Keanu took a slow breath, as if he were weighing his words, but before he could speak, the director walked in, breaking the fragile quiet. The director had that impatient energy he often carried when the schedule was tight. He announced that they needed to run a difficult scene sooner than planned. Sandra felt her stomach drop. It was one of the emotional scenes, the kind that required her to be raw, exposed, and painfully honest. She wasn't sure she could do it today, not with her mind stuck on Keanu and the questions she couldn't answer. She tried to hide her anxiety, but of course, Keanu noticed. He always noticed. He walked beside her as they headed to the set, keeping a respectful distance but close enough for her to feel his concern. He asked if she was all right, but not in a surface-level way. He asked like he already knew she was. She wanted to tell him the truth, to admit that she felt overwhelmed again, that she wasn't sure she could do the scene without breaking, but the words wouldn't come. There were too many emotions tangled inside her, and she didn't know how to untangle them in front of him. The scene they were filming was one that demanded trust between the actors. They played characters caught between fear and affection, characters who didn't fully understand their connection but felt it deeply anyway. The irony wasn't lost on Sandra. She could feel the unspoken tension between her and Keanu weaving itself into the lines, the movements, the moments of silence. Every time she looked at him, she saw something in his eyes, something fragile, something wanting, something he kept locked away but couldn't fully hide. The first take went well enough, but the director wanted more. He wanted more vulnerability, more trembling emotion, more rawness. Sandra felt her throat tighten. She wasn't sure she could go deeper without revealing too much of herself, too much of what she felt off-screen. But she also knew she couldn't hold back forever. She glanced at Keanu, and he gave her a small, grounding nod, as if he were silently saying, "I'm here, it's all right, you can do this." So she did. She went into the next take with her heart open, letting the emotions flow through her instead of fighting them. Halfway through the scene, she felt her voice crack in a way that wasn't planned, and she saw Keanu's expression shift, his eyes widening with concern that wasn't part of the script. He stepped closer to her, his voice softer than the lines required, and for a brief moment the world blurred. They weren't playing characters anymore. They were themselves, two people standing in front of each other with too many unspoken truths between them. When the scene ended, the room was silent. The director looked pleased, but Sandra felt exposed, as if everyone could see the feelings she had tried so hard to hide. She walked off set quickly, needing air, needing space, needing to breathe without feeling like her heart was about to spill out of her chest. She went to the far end of the studio, where old props were stored, where the lights were dimmer and the noise softer. She leaned against a wall and closed her eyes, trying to calm the storm inside her. A moment later, she heard footsteps. She didn't need to open her eyes to know who it was. Keanu approached slowly, as he always did when he didn't want to overwhelm her. He asked if she wanted to talk, but his voice trembled just slightly, as if he was nervous too. She felt a sharp ache inside her chest. She had always seen him as steady, calm, almost impossible to shake. Hearing that tiny quiver made her realize he was just as human as she was, just as scared of breaking something delicate. She hesitated, unsure whether speaking the truth would fix things or make everything worse. She told him she wasn't sure what was happening, that she felt something she didn't have a name for. She admitted she didn't know where the line between acting and feeling had blurred. Her voice cracked again, and she looked away, ashamed of how messy her emotions were. Keanu stayed silent for a long moment, and she felt her stomach twist with fear that she had gone too far. But then he took a careful step closer, close enough for her to feel his warmth, but not close enough to touch. He told her that she wasn't imagining anything, that he felt it too, that he had been trying to respect her space, trying not to confuse her, trying not to let his own feelings cross a boundary she didn't ask him to cross. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but every word hit the center of her chest like a steady heartbeat. Sandra felt the air shift around them, heavy and fragile. For a moment, she thought everything would finally fall into place, that they would acknowledge what had been growing between them for months. She felt the words rising in her throat, ready to meet his, ready to step into something new, risky, and painfully honest. But before she could speak, before she could even draw a full breath, someone called her name from across the studio. It was urgent, almost panicked. She turned sharply and saw one of the assistant directors running toward them, his face pale and shaken. He told them something had happened outside. Something serious. Something that would pull both of them out of the quiet, vulnerable moment they had finally reached. And as Sandra and Keanu rushed behind him, their hearts pounding with fear and confusion, neither of them knew that what awaited them outside would not only test their resilience, but would change the path of their connection in a way neither could ever predict the moment Sandra stepped out of the studio doors. The sharp chill in the air hit her like a wave. It was still early, the sun barely rising, but the crowd on the sidewalk made the morning feel heavier than it should. She heard voices calling her name, voices calling Keanu's name, and for a split second she couldn't understand what was happening. Then she saw the flashing lights, bright, cold, and far too many for an ordinary morning. Police cars, a paramedic van, people standing in small clusters, whispering with wide eyes and pale faces. Sandra felt her breath catch in her throat, a deep feeling of dread crawling up her spine. Keanu stepped slightly in front of her, not to block her view, but to steady her without touching her. That was something he always did, protective in a quiet way, never crossing a line. The assistant director led them toward a section of the parking lot taped off with yellow lines. Sandra felt her heartbeat grow louder with every step, like her body already knew something she hadn't seen yet. She expected to see an accident, maybe a crew member who had tripped or gotten hurt. She expected something small enough to breathe through. What she didn't expect was a man sitting on the ground beside a damaged motorcycle, clutching his arm while paramedics tried to calm him. He looked shaken, dazed, as if the world had spun too fast for him to keep up. Sandra recognized him instantly. He was a stunt worker who often moved props across the lot. He had always been friendly, always greeted people with a tired smile. Seeing him like this sent a sharp ache through her chest. A police officer approached Keanu and Sandra, asking if either of them had seen what happened. Before Sandra could speak, the stunt worker lifted his head and looked straight at Keanu. Something in his eyes cracked Sandra's heart open. He said he had been trying to move the motorcycle before the rain from the night before made the ground slippery. He had lost control. The bike slid. He tried to stop it, but it fell on his arm, pinning him to the ground. He said he had been calling for help, but no one heard him at first. Sandra felt sick. She remembered leaving the lot the night before. She had been shaken by the moment she shared with Keanu, distracted by her own swirling thoughts. She had been so lost in that emotional fog that she hadn't noticed anything unusual around the far corner of the parking lot. She wondered if she could have heard him if she had stayed a few minutes longer. Guilt crawled into her stomach like ice. Keanu asked the stunt worker if he would be all right, his voice soft, steady, and filled with genuine concern. Even now, in the middle of chaos, he didn't let panic take over. Sandra admired that about him. He always approached fear with a kind of careful calm, as if his presence alone could slow the world down. The stunt worker nodded weakly, saying the paramedics believed his arm was badly sprained, maybe fractured, but he would recover. He said he just got unlucky. Then, as the paramedics helped him up, he said something that left Sandra frozen in place. He said he had seen someone in the lot the night before, someone he thought had come to help him. He said it was a man walking alone, tall, moving quickly, as if in a hurry. He said he called out, but the person didn't hear him or didn't notice. He said he wasn't sure because the figure disappeared behind the trailers before he could get a clear look. Sandra felt her breath stick inside her chest. She looked at Keanu and their eyes locked. She didn't know why her stomach tightened or why she suddenly felt a pull of fear mixed with confusion. She told herself it had nothing to do with him. He had been with her last night. He had walked her to her car. He had gone to his own car afterward. He wouldn't have seen or ignored someone calling out for help. Keanu wasn't the type of person to walk past suffering. He never had been. But when Sandra looked into his eyes, she saw something flicker, something that looked like recognition or memory or regret. And that flicker terrified her in a way she didn't understand. The paramedics drove away, the police began clearing the scene, and the crowd slowly drifted back toward the studio doors. But Sandra and Keanu stayed where they were, standing in the middle of the quiet lot, surrounded by the fading echo of what had just happened. She felt the weight of everything pressing on her. Her emotions from earlier, the unfinished conversation, the injured stunt worker, the strange look in Keanu's eyes. She finally asked him, her voice barely steady, if he was all right. Keanu stared at the empty space where the paramedic van had been. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual, almost fragile, as if he was piecing his thoughts together while speaking them out loud. He said he was thinking about last night. He said he had been distracted too. He said he had left the lot later than he normally would because he wanted to make sure Sandra drove away safely. He said he had walked fast across the lot, thinking about their moment, thinking about the feelings he had kept inside for months. He said he didn't remember hearing anything. He didn't remember seeing anyone. But the way he said it carried a shadow of doubt, as if he feared there might have been something he missed. Sandra felt something sharp twist inside her. She wanted to reach out to reassure him, to tell him it wasn't his fault. But the words wouldn't come. Something was shifting in him, some hidden guilt, some buried fear, and she didn't know how to help him carry it. Before she could speak, the director called for them again. Filming had to continue. The world didn't pause for emotional storms. Sandra followed Keanu back inside the studio, but the air felt different now, heavier and tense in a way that didn't feel like ordinary pressure. Keanu walked a few steps ahead of her, shoulders slightly hunched, as if he were carrying something too heavy to hide. All day he was quiet. He hit his marks, said his lines, smiled when needed, but something in him was distant, as if his mind kept drifting back to the parking lot, back to the stunt worker calling for help. Sandra watched him closely, feeling an ache build inside her. She knew Keanu had a tender heart. He felt things deeply. He carried guilt easily, even when he shouldn't. She feared he was blaming himself for something that wasn't his fault. When their final scene wrapped for the day, Keanu disappeared before she could reach him. She tried to follow, but by the time she stepped outside, the parking lot was already empty. The silence hit her like a cold wave. She stood alone beside her car, the same place where their moment had begun the night before, and she felt a painful tightness in her chest. She didn't know where he had gone or why he had left so quickly. She didn't know what he was thinking. And she didn't know that tonight he would face something that would shake him even deeper than the morning's accident. Something he would not tell her. Something that would leave both of them wondering if fate was trying to pull them together or tear them apart. Keanu didn't normally disappear without saying goodbye. Even on the longest days, even when exhaustion clung to his shoulders like heavy cloth, he always managed a warm nod or a quiet smile before leaving. That small gesture had become something Sandra unconsciously relied on, something she looked for at the end of each long shoot. So when he vanished from the studio without a word, the absence hit her harder than she expected. It created a strange emptiness around her, as if the air had shifted in a way she couldn't understand. She stood in the parking lot for a long time, watching the last few crew members drive away. She kept replaying the morning, the injured stunt worker, the look of doubt flickering across Keanu's face, and the way he had walked through the day like a man carrying something too heavy for his heart. She wanted to call him, but she didn't know if that would help or make the ache inside him deepen. She didn't want to push him. She didn't want to cross a boundary he hadn't invited her to cross. What she didn't know was that while she stood there, feeling torn between reaching out and stepping back, Keanu was already driving through the quiet streets of the city, his thoughts swirling so fast he barely noticed the traffic lights glowing in the distance. He kept replaying last night over and over, trying to remember every step he had taken, every sound he had heard, every shadow he had passed. He felt guilt gnawing at him, sharp and relentless. Even though the stunt worker had insisted it wasn't anyone's fault, Keanu couldn't shake the fear that he had missed something important, that he had been too distracted, too wrapped up in his feelings for Sandra to notice someone calling out for help. The thought made his chest tighten. He didn't want to imagine himself as careless or distracted. He had always tried to be the kind of person who paid attention, who noticed the small things, who was present when people needed him. But last night, he hadn't been present. He had been lost in the emotion of the moment with Sandra. He had been thinking about the warmth in her eyes, the tremble in her voice, the unspoken truth rising between them. And now he feared that moment might have come with a cost he wasn't prepared to face. Keanu parked his car near an old bridge overlooking the city. He often came here when he needed to think. It was quiet, overlooked by tired street lamps that hummed softly in the night breeze. The water below moved slowly, reflecting the faint glow of passing headlights. Keanu leaned against the railing, breathing in the cold air, trying to slow the storm inside him. He didn't notice another figure approaching until the footsteps stopped a few feet away. It was the security guard who watched over the studio lot at night, an older man with worn eyes and a calm voice. He had recognized Keanu's car and walked up the bridge to check on him. He asked if everything was all right, but there was a knowing look in his gaze, as if he could already see the weight sitting on Keanu's shoulders. Keanu hesitated. Normally, he kept his private emotions hidden from people he didn't know well, but the guard had a gentle presence, something grounding, something steady. So Keanu told him about the stunt worker. He told him about the guilt he felt. He told him about the moment in the parking lot with Sandra, the moment that had distracted him so deeply that everything else had faded. The guard listened quietly, letting the words settle between them. When Keanu finished, the guard sighed, then told him something he hadn't expected to hear. He said that the stunt worker had been lying on the ground for a while before anyone found him. He said he had been reviewing the security footage and had seen the accident occur long before Keanu had been in the lot. He said that the stunt worker had tried to lift the bike himself first, and only much later did he try calling out. The guard said the man's voice had been weak from the injury, hardly loud enough to reach anyone more than a few feet away. Keanu felt a powerful wave of relief surge through him, but it didn't last long. The guard paused, then added that on the footage he had seen something else, something strange, something Keanu needed to hear. He said that minutes before Keanu walked Sandra to her car, someone else had been in the parking lot. A figure moving near the far trailers, the same direction the stunt worker had pointed to earlier. But the figure moved too fast, too quietly, almost as if they didn't want to be seen. The camera hadn't captured their face clearly. All that could be seen was a shadow slipping out of frame. Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. The guard said it could have been anyone, another crew member leaving late, someone cutting through the lot, maybe even a stranger passing by. But there was something in his tone that made it clear he believed it wasn't random, that there was something unsettling about the way the person moved, something deliberate. Keanu felt the relief slowly drain out of him, replaced by a different kind of tension. He asked the guard if he planned to tell the director or the police. The guard said he would report it, but he didn't want to cause panic before understanding more. He said he needed to review the footage again, maybe clean up the image to get more detail. He told Keanu to try not to worry, but the more he talked, the more Keanu felt the weight of a new, darker uncertainty pressing against him. The guard walked away after a few minutes, leaving Keanu alone again on the bridge. The city lights shimmered below, but they no longer brought him calm. He felt a strange unease creeping into his thoughts. Something about the shadow in the footage, something about the stunt worker's story, something about the timing of everything. It all twisted together into a knot he couldn't untangle. And then, almost without meaning to, his thoughts drifted back to Sandra. He remembered the look in her eyes earlier, the quiet concern, the softness he had almost reached for before the assistant director interrupted them. He wondered if she was thinking about him too, if she felt the unfinished words between them still floating in the air. He wondered if he should tell her what the guard had said, or if it would only scare her, make her worry about things neither of them understood yet. As he stood there trying to decide what to do next, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out slowly, expecting a message from the studio or maybe one of the crew members checking on him. But it wasn't a message from them. It was a message from Sandra. She asked if he was safe. She asked why he had left so suddenly. She asked if he could talk. And for a moment, Keanu felt his heart lift. Maybe tonight could still hold something gentle. Maybe their unfinished moment could still find its way back to them. But then, as he glanced at his phone, he saw something else. A second message. One he didn't expect. One with no name attached. One that simply said, "I saw you in the lot last night. You missed something, be careful." Keanu stared at the words, feeling the world tilt beneath him. And somewhere across the city, sitting alone in her quiet home, Sandra Bullock was about to receive a message of her own. One that would pull her into the same storm Keanu had just stepped into. Sandra had been sitting in the quiet of her living room for almost an hour, unable to focus on anything except the heavy silence pressing against the walls. She had tried to read, tried to distract herself, tried to think about anything other than Keanu walking away without a word. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the uncertainty in his expression, the way he had carried the morning's accident like a weight on his back. She knew him well enough to recognize the signs. Keanu wasn't distant because he wanted to be. He was distant because he was hurting, and he didn't want anyone to feel responsible for that, including her. Still, she couldn't escape the sting of his absence. She kept her phone by her side, checking it every few minutes, hoping he would message her first. She told herself she wasn't waiting, but the truth sat in her chest like a soft ache. She missed him, not just as a coworker, not as a friend, but as something deeper, something she still didn't know how to name. The space he had left tonight felt too big, too hollow, too wrong. When her phone finally buzzed, she moved fast, almost dropping it in her rush. She hoped it would be him. It was. The message came from an unknown number, just like the one Keanu had received. but she didn't know that yet. The text said, "You should ask him what he really saw last night." Sandra froze. The words didn't make sense at first. She stared at the screen, reading them again and again until her heartbeat began to rise, pounding like a slow drum in her ears. She didn't understand who would send her this, or why they would mention Keanu, or what they meant by what he really saw. But the more she tried to make sense of it, the more a deep, unsettling fear began to coil inside her. She typed back cautiously, asking who the message was from. No answer came. She asked why they were telling her this. No answer. She asked what they meant. Still nothing. The silence grew heavier with every passing minute, like the air around her had thickened. She tried to call the number, but it went straight to voicemail. No greeting, no name, just an empty line that only made her more uneasy. She set her phone down and pressed her hands into her eyes, trying to calm herself. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone got the wrong number. Maybe someone from the set thought they were being funny. She told herself all of that, but none of it felt true. The message felt too pointed, too specific, too deeply tied to the strange tension of the day. That was when her phone buzzed again. This time it was Keanu. He apologized for disappearing. He said he needed time to think. He said he didn't mean to worry her. His words were soft, careful, wrapped in the same kindness he always carried. Reading them eased something inside her, loosened the knot wrapped around her heart. But it didn't erase the fear the unknown message had planted. So even though she was terrified of the answer, Sandra asked him the question she never wanted to ask. She told him she had gotten a strange message about last night. She asked him if there was something he hadn't told her. She asked him if he had seen anything in the lot that he was hiding from her. The moment she hit send, she regretted it. She didn't want him to think she doubted him. She didn't want him to feel accused or cornered. But the question was already out there, floating between them, impossible to take back. It took him a long time to respond. Too long. Sandra sat still, barely breathing, waiting for her phone to light up. Every second felt like a minute. Every minute felt like an hour. She kept remembering the shadowy tension in his voice earlier, the haunted look in his eyes, the way he blamed himself for the stunt worker's accident even though it wasn't his fault. And just when she started to fear, he wouldn't answer at all. Her phone buzzed. The message was short. "We need to talk, but not over text. Not tonight, tomorrow morning. Please trust me." Sandra felt her stomach tighten. There was something in his words, something that sounded like fear or urgency or both. She wrote back, asking if he was okay, asking if he was safe, asking if he needed her right now. He didn't answer. Minutes passed, then in hours. And Sandra felt something growing inside her that she hadn't felt in years, real, bone-deep worry. She tried calling him, but his phone rang and rang without anyone picking up. She told herself that he was probably driving or distracted, or maybe he had fallen asleep. She tried not to imagine anything worse. But then she heard a sound outside. A soft thud on her porch. A sound that didn't belong to the quiet night. She froze, listening, heart pounding. She moved toward the window slowly, her breath catching as she peeked through the curtains. On her porch was an envelope. Plain white sealed. There was no one outside, no footsteps, no car pulling away, just the envelope lying there as if it had appeared out of nowhere. Her hands shook as she opened the front door and picked it up. She brought it inside, feeling the weight of something more than paper inside it. Something heavier, something that made her pulse quicken in fear. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and on it, written in uneven handwriting, were 6 words that made her knees nearly buckle. "He didn't tell you everything last night." Sandra felt the world narrow around her. She called Keanu again. Still no answer. She didn't know it yet, but at that exact moment, miles across the city, Keanu was staring at something that would shake him even deeper, something that would drag both of them into the heart of a mystery neither of them wanted. But neither of them could avoid the moment the call ended without Keanu answering. A cold fear settled deep inside Sandra's chest. She paced across her living room, gripping the envelope so tightly the edges bent beneath her fingers. She kept checking her phone, hoping for a message from him, hoping for anything that would break the silence stretching between them like a thin, trembling string. Every second felt heavier, as if something unseen was pressing its weight onto her shoulders. What she didn't know was that, while she stood in her living room fighting the rising panic inside her, Keanu was standing in another quiet place, one that held answers he had never expected to face. Earlier that night, after he received the strange message telling him he had missed something, Keanu hadn't gone home. Something inside him refused to rest until he understood what the message meant, until he uncovered what the shadow in the parking lot footage really was. He drove back to the studio, hoping the night security guard would still be there. The guard unlocked the security room, letting Keanu inside. The room smelled faintly of old paper and dust, filled with screens showing grainy footage from different corners of the lot. The guard played the recording again, pausing at the moment the dark figure moved across the screen. Keanu leaned closer, trying to make out the shape. The figure was tall, wearing a hood, moving quickly along the far edge of the lot. It wasn't someone he recognized. The shadow moved with purpose, as if knowing exactly where they were going. The guard said he had tried cleaning up the footage, sharpening the image, but the lighting was too dim and the figure stayed obscured. He said the police would need to review it, but he wanted to gather as much detail as possible first. Keanu felt a strange heaviness spread through him. Something about the figure didn't feel random. He kept staring at the screen, feeling a faint chill crawl up his spine. As he watched, he noticed something small and easy to miss. The figure paused, turning their head toward the far end of the lot, the direction of the stunt worker. The figure hesitated, as if considering whether to approach. Then, suddenly, they turned away and disappeared behind the trailers. Keanu felt a sick twist in his stomach. He didn't know why the figure had hesitated. He didn't know why they had walked away. He didn't know what their intention had been. But he did know one thing: the stunt worker hadn't been alone after all. Someone had been there, someone who could have helped him, someone who chose not to. Keanu sank back into the chair, running a trembling hand through his hair. He had spent the whole day blaming himself for missing something, yet the truth was far more unsettling. Someone else had been in that lot. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who had left without helping a man trapped under a heavy motorcycle. Keanu didn't know if the figure had anything to do with the messages he and Sandra received, but the timing was too strange, too deliberate. He thanked the guard and stepped outside. The night air was cold, sharper than he expected. He felt eyes on him. When he turned, no one was there. He tried to shake off the feeling and headed toward his car, but before he reached it, something on the windshield caught his attention. Something white, tucked beneath the wiper blade. A note. His heart hammered as he unfolded it. The handwriting matched the note Sandra had received. It said, "Tomorrow is too late." Keanu felt the world tilt. The message he had sent Sandra, telling her they would talk tomorrow, now felt like a mistake. He had to speak to her tonight. He had to tell her everything. He couldn't let fear, guilt, or mystery push them further apart. He couldn't let someone else's shadow decide the next part of their story. He got into his car, started the engine, and drove straight to her house. Sandra was still standing by the window when she saw his headlights. Her breath left her in a shaky rush. She opened the door before he reached it, and the moment his eyes met hers, the fear inside her eased just enough for her to breathe. He looked exhausted, shaken, but determined. He apologized for not answering her calls, saying he had been at the studio with the security guard. He handed her the note he found on his windshield. Sandra's heart tightened when she saw the handwriting, another message from the same unknown person. They moved inside quickly, shutting the door against the cold night. Keanu sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, head bowed. Sandra sat across from him, feeling the tension fill the room like thick fog. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then Keanu lifted his head and told her everything: the stunt worker's accident, the security footage, the shadowy figure in the lot, the fear that had been clawing at him all day. He admitted that he had doubted himself, that he had feared he let someone down, that his guilt had felt so heavy he couldn't see straight. He said he didn't want to tell her earlier because he didn't want to add fear to her already overwhelming day. He said he had wanted to protect her from the uncertainty, even if it meant holding everything inside. Sandra listened without looking away. Her eyes softened as he spoke. She could see the weight behind each word, the honesty trembling beneath his calm voice. When he finished, she reached out and gently placed her hand on top of his. She told him she wished he had trusted her more, not because she was angry, but because she didn't want him to face anything alone. She said she didn't care about the shadow in the footage or the message from the unknown number as much as she cared about him. She told him she wanted him to feel safe enough to share his fears with her, even the ones he thought would make him look vulnerable. Keanu's eyes softened, a fragile warmth breaking through the exhaustion. He told her he had never felt this close to anyone in a long time. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was tender, like two hearts learning to breathe together again after too long apart. The air between them shifted into something warm, something honest, something that had been building for months. Keanu gently took her other hand, his voice soft as he said he had been afraid of pushing too far, afraid of ruining the steady comfort they had built, afraid of hurting her without meaning to. Sandra squeezed his hands, telling him that the only thing hurting her was not knowing what he felt. For the first time, the truth finally rose between them, careful, warm, undeniable. Keanu admitted he cared for her deeply, more deeply than he had meant to, more deeply than he knew how to say. Sandra felt a trembling warmth spread through her chest as she told him she felt the same. Their hands stayed intertwined, their breath steadying, the weight of uncertainty fading into something gentler. As they sat there, the unknown messages seemed distant, like shadows losing their strength. And then the final message came. Her phone buzzed on the table. They both jumped, fear sparking back to life. Sandra picked it up with trembling fingers. The message read, "The shadow is gone. Thank you for checking. He is safe now." Keanu and Sandra shared a confused look. No name, no number, no explanation. But something in the words felt less threatening than before, almost relieved, almost grateful. Keanu exhaled slowly, his shoulders loosening. Sandra leaned against him, feeling the tension finally melt away. They didn't know who the shadow was. They didn't know why the messages came. They didn't know who had been in the lot or what their intentions were, and maybe they would never know. Some mysteries didn't bring danger, they brought warning, protection, attention. Whatever the truth was, it had passed. And now something else remained, something tender, fragile, and real. Keanu wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close, and Sandra rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time in days, neither of them felt afraid. The unknown had drifted away, leaving behind something brighter. They had found clarity not through fear, but through honesty. They had found calm not through answers, but through each other. And as the night settled around them, soft and warm, Sandra understood something she hadn't seen before. The moment she feared would break them was the moment that finally brought them together. And Keanu, quiet and humble as always, simply held her close, grateful that the truth, whatever it had been, had led him back to her. Their story wasn't perfect, it wasn't simple, but it was real, and that was enough.